Okay, good evening, Bante. Good evening, everybody, brothers and sisters. Tonight, I'm going to present a very special presentation on harmonious perspective, and we're using science to explain how we can cultivate Sammā Diṭṭhi and then also Sammā Sankappa. That means both harmonious perspective and harmonious orientation. So if we look at the Sublime Eightfold Way using Bante's translation, today's presentation is very much focused on Sammā Diṭṭhi, harmonious perspective, and Sammā Sankappa, which is harmonious orientation. And harmonious perspective is what most people translate as right view, but as Bante pointed out, Sammā basically means harmony or working in unison in a unified way, so therefore harmonious is a more precise translation. And view is just a point of view. Perspective is to be able to see something from various points of view. So harmonious perspective is a more precise translation of Sammā Diṭṭhi. So we're going to focus on using science to explain how we can cultivate Sammā Diṭṭhi, and I will also lead to the discussion on cultivation of Sammā Sankappa, which is commonly translated as right intentions, but as Bante pointed out, it is harmonious orientation, where you basically orientate your life to perform and to function in accordance with what you have learned and understood in Sammā Diṭṭhi. So we're basically looking at these first two, which represents the initial level of Panya. This is not the ultimate level of Panya, but the initial level of Panya needed to proceed with all the Eightfold Way. That means to continue with practicing Sila and practicing Samadhi. And then you will attain the ultimate Panya, the higher level of Panya. So let's explore this Sammā Diṭṭhi and Sammā Sankappa, the initial level of Panya needed in order to cultivate and practice the Sublime Eightfold Way. First, we have to look at it from the scientific perspective, which is then to look at the brain, because when we speak of cultivation, we're speaking of using the mind, and the mind is nothing but an activity of the brain. Activity of the entire nervous system. So basically when we speak of the mind, we're speaking of activity of the central nervous system. So we have to take a look at the brain itself. So if we want to understand the scientific perspective of cultivation, then we have to understand how the brain works to help us learn and understand any form of knowledge in order to gain wisdom. So when we look at the brain is evolved into three main layers. The most primitive layer is what is called the brain stem. This is commonly called the survival brain. And this is the part of the brain that helps us stay alive. Next is the middle part of the brain, and this is actually called the limbic system, commonly referred to in layman's term as emotional brain. And this is the part of the brain that is responsible for a lot of functions pertaining to emotions. And we spoke a little bit about emotions in the last talk, so I'm not going to go much deeper into that. Then comes the outermost layer of the brain, the most advanced part of the brain, the cerebral cortex. This term, cerebral cortex, is just one of the many terms scientists use to describe that part of the brain. There are other terms used which basically talk about more or less the same part of the brain with some slight distinctions. Another term used is cerebrum, spelled with the R, cerebrum. Another term used is neocortex, which means it's the newest cortex. The reason it is called neocortex is simply that this part of the brain actually is made of 6 layers of cortices, and the innermost 2 is associated with the limbic system. It's the outermost 4 which is more associated with thinking. So the outermost 4 is known as the neocortex, the newer cortex. So cerebral cortex basically is referring to this part of the brain which is responsible for our thinking and our learning. This is very important. When we speak of cultivation of Sammā Diṭṭhi and Sammā Sankappa, then thinking and learning are the most important mental functions that are needed. One important thing we have to look at is the emotional brain. The reason is, it is not that we are not able to learn. It is simply that the emotional brain gets aroused, it gets excited, and this emotional excitement continuously and continuously disturb the thinking brain. And it is this disturbance that makes us difficult to learn and understand things, because we tend to react in an emotional manner. And it is because of the functions inside this part of the brain. So let's take a look at what's there. Deep inside this part of the brain is a small little tissue called the amygdala. Now, I have spoken about the amygdala in previous presentation, so I won't go much deeper. But this is the part of the brain that disturbs. Once it's aroused, it actually causes a various chain reaction that disturbs the thinking brain. So now let's take a look at what scientists have to say about how the brain is evolved and what the brain is made of.
As humans have evolved, it's doubled in size. It weighs only 3 pounds, but it consumes 20% of all the fuel our bodies take in, generating enough energy to keep a light bulb burning.
And you have to consider the brain having evolved like an old house, where we just added different rooms. And so there's all these stairways and connections.
In the basement is the oldest part, called the brain stem. It's something we share with reptiles and other mammals. It's what keeps us alive, governing vital functions like heart rate, respiration, digestion, and blood pressure. Things that happen without having to think about them.
The next level up, the first floor, more evolved. Hundreds of thousands of years later, it's called the limbic system. And this is very important in the processing of emotions.
Within the limbic system are the amygdala, 2 nuggets of tissue, 1 in each half of the brain. They are no bigger than a fingernail, yet they are the brain's central command center for our emotional reactions. One of the simplest and strongest of these is fear, a primal emotion we all share.
If you had to pick one brain region that was most important in fear, it would be the amygdala.
What scientists discovered is that as humans evolved, another part of the brain, called the cortex, also became involved in processing fear.
The part that makes us most human about the brain is our frontal cortex.
If the amygdala is the first floor, the cortex is the second floor of the brain. It's the brain's thin, wrinkly outer layer that's divided into 4 sets of lobes.
If you unfolded the cortex of a monkey, it would be about the size of a piece of paper. If you unfolded our cortex, it's about 4 sheets of paper large. And the reason it's wrinkly is because you have to squish that all inside of the skull.
The frontal lobes comprise the area just above our eyes, and these are the newest rooms of the brain. As humans evolved, the frontal lobes became the place where conscious, rational thought is processed. It's where we do our problem solving.
The frontal lobes are so interesting because they are really the conductor of the brain. They synchronize all activity.
Scientists made a major breakthrough in fear research when they found that information from our senses reaches the amygdala almost twice as fast as it takes to get to our frontal lobes. The speed of the different brain signals means unless we instinctively know how to react to a potential threat, we may freeze in fear, waiting for the frontal lobes to catch up to figure out the right response.
Part of what happens with fear and panic is the unknown, is not knowing what to do next, and so your brain essentially freezes the way a deer freezes in the headlight.
So the amygdala may get very fast signals about fear, but sometimes they're wrong, and quickly the situation may say to you, no, it's not a fear situation, and you're not afraid. So these very quick amygdala signals that you get can be controlled in sort of a top-down way.
So basically, the scientists pointed out that it is the amygdala that is disturbing our thinking, and they did mention at the end there, it is possible to control this in a top-down way. And what is the way? Basically, is to use our thinking brain, the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is basically divided into 4 lobes. As you know, our brain is made of 2 hemispheres, one on each side. And within these 2 hemispheres, there are 4 lobes. The occipital lobe at the back, the parietal lobe over the top, the temporal lobe on the side, and the frontal lobe right behind the forehead. And the part of the brain that is responsible for thinking is really right behind the forehead, the frontal lobe. It is responsible for a number of important functions: attention system, long-term memory, logic and critical thinking, lateral thinking, such as creativity and imagination, decision making, goal setting, planning, and judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. Now, if you look at all these functions, which are the functions most responsible for cultivating so-called right view, or cultivating harmonious perspective? Being able to see what is good, what is bad, being able to understand how to make use of learning from good things and avoiding being distracted by unwholesome things. It's basically the last 2 lines. Decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. When we learn things, with these functions, we are able to discern what is right from wrong, what is good from bad, what is wholesome from unwholesome, and so on. So it is this part of the thinking, this part of the brain that helps us to think in a way, can help us cultivate having right view or harmonious perspective, and being able to reorientate our thinking and reorientate our whole life towards the goal that we want. It is this goal setting the goal to learn, cultivate, and practice the Buddha Dharma. That is basically the orientation we're talking about. So this learning is all done in this very little small part of the brain right behind your eyebrow, that little part called the prefrontal cortex. This is the most important part of your thinking brain, because this is the part of the brain that is responsible for your decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. So the amazing thing is that when you actually learn to meditate, scientists have actually discovered with clear evidence that when you meditate, it is this part of the brain that is being cultivated and being trained the most. It is this part of the brain that is being sharpened. So that's why it is so important to apply meditation, to learn, understand, and practice meditation as part of this Sublime Eightfold Way in order to accomplish the goal. Right? So let's take a look at how the brain has evolved. It's very important because the question often arises, why is it that human beings that can do this? Why can't animals do that? Well, we can go back in history, millions of years, how the brain has evolved. And if we compare the brain of the human being and the brain of the closest species, the primates, then we can see. Now, some people say, oh, humans evolved from chimpanzees. No, humans did not evolve from chimpanzees. Humans evolved from a species that somehow came from a tree-dwelling mammal. Okay, so let's go back in time and see the brain of chimpanzee versus the brain of the human being. We're looking at the brain of the chimpanzees, and chimpanzees evolved about 5 million years ago, 5 to 10 million years ago. Then came another species that was actually a primate, not a human species. The human species is called hominid. This is a primate species that called Australopithecus africanus. And this evolved around 3 million years ago. And a very famous set of bones discovered that belongs to this species is nicknamed Lucy, because it was a female. Lucy is the name given to the set of bones they discovered that belong to this species, Australopithecus africanus, which evolved around 3 million years ago. This is actually primates, ape-like creatures that stood on 2 feet. Right? Basically bipedal primates standing on 2 feet. Then came the first known species of human. You see, scientists have discovered that over 2 million years, there had been 10 to 15 different species of human beings. In other words, it depends on which scientist you ask. Some of them say there are only 10, some say 15, there are even some who classify up to 20. Whatever the number is, it's around 10 to 15 species of human species. And the first known human species was the Homo habilis. This was first discovered around 2 million years ago. And then this human species then became extinct and other human species started to evolve. The most advanced human species before us, we are Homo sapiens, but before we came, we only came around 200,000 years ago. But before we came along, around 1.5 million years ago, there was a very intelligent species called the Homo erectus. This, in fact, was the longest surviving human species before us. Well, even including us, they survived for about 1 million years. They only became extinct about 50,000 years ago. So this Homo erectus actually had enlarged the brain size. And then came another species that appeared about 500,000 years ago, or 300,000 years ago, called the Neanderthal. And this species was the last known species before we came along. We are the Homo sapiens. According to scientists, around 50,000 years ago, there had been as many as 4 human species coexisting. Right? Anyway, all that we're not so interested in. What we're more interested in is the size of the brain. And the way they measure the size of the brain is to measure the skull and to measure the internal cranial capacity of the skull. That means they take the skull, they measure the inner part where the brain sits in. So they measure the size of that. And they found, of course, the chimpanzee measured only 400 cubic centimeter. And then the primate species that started to walk on 2 feet, Australopithecus, that was not human yet. It's nearly twice the size, 457 cubic centimeter. So they were beginning to learn how to use tools, but they were not considered as humans yet. Then came the first human species, Homo habilis, which had quite a large brain capacity compared to chimpanzees. And this image here, the look of this creature, human creature, this was basically the scientists' reconstruction based on the skull they discovered, and they basically found that depending on that time, how the skin grows and stuff like that, and they started to recreate what that creature would look like. So you could safely say this is our ancestor. Homo habilis, the first known human species, hominid. The first hominid species. Hominid species or human species starts with the word homo. So the word homo basically means human. Homo habilis. Then came the more advanced species, and you can see the brain size growing from 552 cubic centimeter average to an average brain size double of that. Homo erectus, 1000 cubic centimeter. And this was one of the smarter human species. They learned how to use tools, and they actually evolved in the learning of how to use tools. That means they were using tools in a smarter way as time went by. Then came, interestingly, a human species, Neanderthal, that had 50% more brain capacity. But unfortunately, scientists discovered this particular species of human were not very intelligent, despite having a bigger brain. So, in other words, size does not always matter. It's how you use it. And they found that this particular species, if you compare, say 1,500 cubic centimeter, compared to what we are, we have slightly smaller brain capacity. the human being, the Homo sapiens that is us today, in fact had slightly smaller brain capacity than the Neanderthal. But what set us apart from the rest of human species was basically the way we use our brain. So it's not just a matter of size, because Neanderthals became extinct around 30,000 years ago. The last known Neanderthal was discovered in some caves in the Mediterranean, some islands in Mediterranean Ocean, and that was about 28,000 years ago. So we are the Homo sapiens. We only started showing up on Earth around 200,000 years ago. So you can see the brain size. In a way, you could say size matters, but it is also proven that Neanderthals, because they were not able to use their brain in a intelligent manner somehow, so size for them did not matter. For the Homo erectus, it mattered because they survived 1 million years before they went extinct. Until today, scientists could not debate, could not understand or even come to a consensus why some of these species went extinct. Some said it was adaptation, but again, Homo erectus survived until 50,000 years ago. There was also another species not shown here, Homo florensis. They also survived until 50,000 years ago. So there were 4 human species then. So if you look at the human brain as it is today, it is much bigger than most of the other species. Right? Basically, it's more than 3 times the capacity of the chimpanzee. These numbers are basically average. So some people would have slightly bigger than this, some people would have slightly smaller than this. But then again, we also know from our own personal experience, some very small sized people are very intelligent. Some very big sized people with huge heads are kind of dumb, So it's again not always size that matters, it's how you use your brain that matters. So today's topic is really about how we can actually train the brain to cultivate the mind. How we can improve the cultivation of the mind by training the brain. So we're coming back to this. The Buddha described mental experiences using those 3 words. The first word he used was vijnana. Basically, vijnana is referring to the perception that arises as a result of sensation and feelings when our sense organs are being stimulated. And then the second word Buddha used is mano, the thinking brain, the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for the cognitive process, our thinking process, that gives us intelligence or intellect. And then, of course, there is chitta, the emotional part of the brain, the affective process. Now, human beings, in Sanskrit and in Pali, it is called manusya. We also know Bahasa Malaysia is derived from Sanskrit, some of the words. So the Malay word for humans, manusya. Now where does this word come from? This word comes from the word mano, simply to mean we are a species that is able to think. And this thinking gives us the power of intellect. And it is through the power of intellect that we are able to progress to where we are today. But of course, there are people who use their intellect in unusual or unwholesome ways. But we're talking about how we can use our intellect in wholesome and useful, productive ways. Now let's take a look at the mind, the model of the mind, or the model of this mental self from another perspective, from the teachings of Sigmund Freud. And he mentioned 3 important words: id, ego, and superego. When he said it, he was referring to that part of our mind which is not well organized, right? And this is the part which is pretty unconscious, in the sense that it is not always aware of what is arising. It is not always in control of what arises. That is the meaning of unconscious there. And it is very much driven by instincts. And according to Sigmund Freud, he said instincts had been present since birth. Now this is the part of the mind where, when the Buddha said is chitta, this is really the emotional part of the mind. According to Sigmund Freud, he also described another part of the mind called the ego, which is the conscious and organized part of the mind, the thinking part of the mind. However, he pointed out, this is the part of the mind that seeks to please the id, pleasing the id's unconscious commands. In other words, this is the thinking part of the mind that is constantly reacting to the demands of this emotional mind. If we're not careful, if we're not conscious, and we're not paying attention to what we're thinking, this part of the mind is coming up with ways and means to please the emotions. And it mediates and rationalizes between emotions and reality. But it has a tendency to please the emotion. And then that is basically corresponding vaguely to what the Buddha described as mano. Then the third part, superego, is the part where we have conscience. We are able to discern good from bad, right from wrong, right? And therefore it's an internalized system of rules and guidance, belief system, conscience, and self-centered gratifications for survival. And basically all these are learned. So this is the part which corresponds to what Buddha teaches as hiri ottappa. That means we understand what is wholesome and unwholesome, and we only want to do what is wholesome. We are fearful of doing unwholesome things that may lead to unwholesome outcomes. Right? We worry about that, and this is often translated with various translations like dread and fear, shame and guilt. Right? We're not going into the definitions, but basically this is the part of the mind that governs our conscience, our belief system. And this is in fact the part of the mind that is subject to the cultivation, to cultivate understanding and knowledge of what is good versus what is not so good. Now, why is it that this ego part of the mind is always trying to please the id? Actually, there is a scientific explanation. The ego trying to please the id is what Bhante described as vicikicca, or cognitive dissonance. The mind is torn between two types of thinking. The emotional thinking, because we feel something, we like something, we are attracted to something, we enjoy certain pleasures, we are hateful of certain painful experiences. That is the feeling we're talking about, the emotional part of the mind. That is tearing us in one direction. And another part of the mind, the reasoning part of the mind, the mano part of the mind, the ability to think and see what is right from wrong, that thinking part, the rationalizing part, is tearing us in the other direction. But constantly we will respond to feeling more than thinking. We will react. All our decisions are based on feeling. If you think about it, everything we decide is basically centered around our feeling, not thinking what is rational. Simple example, knowing the precepts, understanding the 5 precepts, and knowing that breaking the precept is not good for us in terms of it leading to unwholesome outcomes and so on. We know that. Knowing that is reasoning. Knowing that is the part of mano, which is teaching us that. And yet, people like to engage in sensual pleasures. They like to do things that they enjoy doing. Wanting to do things that they enjoy doing is the activity of the citta. It's the citta that drives us to do that. The emotional excitement, making us want more of pleasures and hate the painful part. So basically, when feeling and reasoning pull in opposite direction, this is the condition known as vicikicca, cognitive dissonance. That means the mind is being pulled in different direction. When the mind is being pulled in opposite direction, it is a dissonance, not working together. But if you are thinking and behaving in the same way, in the same direction, then that is called consonance. But we are always experiencing cognitive dissonance, vicikicca. So when that happens, we invariably react according to feelings. But we are so intelligent, we are intelligent creatures, we use our intellect, we use our intelligence to justify our emotional reaction. Right? We say things like, oh, we like to do this because of so many reasons that is good for us. But all this is nothing but justification. So this is what prevents us from cultivating our mind to be pure and wholesome. Because we are continuously being distracted by emotional excitements. And we are continuously being attracted by sensual pleasures. Continuously being disturbed and repelled by what we think is painful. Preventing us or abstaining from practicing things that are pleasurable, that in a way is painful. You know, if we say, stop eating what you enjoy, that is a very painful experience. So that is also another form of pain that causes hatred. So we become hateful towards stopping to enjoy sensual pleasures. Right? So that is also another way of looking at it. Now, why is that so? Again, it's inside the brain. The way the brain has evolved. And if we don't do anything about it, the brain will continue to drive us in this manner. And what is it about the brain that causes us to behave in an emotional manner? In its present state, as the way it is, the way we have picked up all these defilements and so on, the brain naturally drives us to behave and react to feelings more than thinking. Right? So let's take a look at this explanation. It is a tug of war inside the brain.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, tug!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off. It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotion. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is, if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions. This is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has superhighways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
The scientist you saw there is Joseph Ledoux. He is the foremost neuroscientist responsible for researching and in fact discovering the functions of the amygdala. And basically, he's the one who knows most about the amygdala. And yet he pointed out, despite his knowledge and understanding, he still can't control his amygdala. And you can see what has happened there. The way the brain has evolved today, the amygdala has very strong connections to our thinking brain. So when the amygdala is being aroused, right, the emotions are being aroused, there is emotional excitement, the amygdala is continuously sending messages to the thinking brain. And these messages are sabotaging the thinking, disturbing the thinking so that the mind cannot be stable, the mind cannot think clearly. It's continuously sending messages to disturb the thinking. It's like a glass of water, if you're continuously stirring it, it cannot be still. So the mind cannot think clearly because of that. At the same time, the thinking brain has very little and very weak connections going back to the amygdala, going back to the emotional part of the brain. So there is not enough power, not enough ability, capacity for the thinking brain to stop emotional excitements just by purely thinking alone. That's why when a person is emotionally aroused, he is in no position through the power of his intellect to stop his emotional excitement. He can't. He needs to do something else. And this something else is the very important thing which the Buddha has taught us and that Bhante has basically been teaching us all along during meditation. Conscious relaxation. You need to allow the whole body's excitement to calm down. And only then are you able to be in a position to use the power of your thinking to control your emotions, to tame your emotions. Even the Buddha pointed out very clearly that we are always disturbed by two extremities. The extremity of sensual pleasures, and this causes us to express our emotion, expressing emotional excitement by releasing tension in action, going for sensual pleasures, indulging in sensual pleasures. The other extreme, where he had practiced asceticism, is self-torment and self-mortification, abstaining so that everything is bottled up, suppression of emotional urges by withholding all tensions and bottling it up. These two extremities are to be avoided, and therefore it is the middle way. And what is the middle way? Simply put, as Bhante has always been teaching us, the first thing about the middle way is conscious relaxation. Learn to relax first before you start to try to think clearly. And then bring your attention inwards, introspective attention. And it's only through this process of conscious relaxation, introspective attention, can you then attain a level of mental equilibrium. And in this whole process will then help you practice this Sublime Eightfold Way. This is the Sublime Eightfold Way that the Buddha has been teaching us. But if you don't learn to relax, if you don't learn to bring your attention inwards, you have no chance to really practice the Sublime Eightfold Way in a meaningful and productive way to deliver the results you expect. So, conscious relaxation, why? Because we are being stressed by emotional excitement. So stress can be naturally reduced simply by relaxing. What does relaxation do? Conscious relaxation and mental composure basically helps to break this biochemical reaction that's going on. You see, when you get excited, as I spoke about in last week, when you get excited, your body releases all kinds of hormones. And your body is now excited with hormonal reaction. So there is a physiological change in your body. So by relaxing, you allow this biochemical reaction to subside. You can't stop it. You can't say, biochemical reaction, stop. Hormones, stop. You can't do that. You just have to relax. And then it will subside. And when it subsides, then you have conscious relaxation. That is very important. Doing that, you break this biochemical reaction. This is why Bhante's method, the first thing you should do when you learn meditation is to learn to relax. And the next thing to calm your mind basically is to eliminate these arousals simply by bringing your attention inwards. Right? Conscious, focused, introspective attention on the present moment. What is going on? And one way to help you is then to pay attention to your breathing. It is not meditation on breathing. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this anapanasati. A lot of people talk about meditation on your breath. It's not meditating about your breathing, It's actually using breathing as the mechanism, as the tool to bring your attention inwards, bringing this introspective attention. So now you pay attention to your breath as it comes in and goes out. Just observing it, and this can help stop your mind running around. So your mind running around is called mental proliferation, jumping around like a monkey from tree to tree. So stopping this mental proliferation, stopping your reaction to any emotional excitement. So this is really the basic method that Bhante has been teaching us. Now, why do we need to do that? It's very important to understand there is this part of the brain called the reticular activating system. It is found in the brainstem. There are very long neurons going to various parts of the brain. It basically responds to the condition of your body. If your body is agitated, these neurons will get excited. And when these neurons get excited, it actually creates a lot of excitement and agitation throughout your brain. But if your body is calm and relaxed, if you consciously relax your body, that relaxation will also cause these neurons to send messages to the rest of the brain, relax. So this is the reticular activating system. It is caused by these neurons, commonly called the reticular formation. These are the longest neurons found in the brain, coming from the brain stem, spreading to the rest of the brain, into the limbic system, into the cerebral cortex, and so on. The reticular activating system, or commonly called RAS, basically regulates switches between arousal, sleep, and awake states of mind. 3 states of mind. So switching between these 3 mental states. The first is emotionally reactive. That means if your body is stressed by pain and pleasures, that excitement, the hormonal reactions in your body, if the body is excited physically, agitated, this triggers this reticular activating system to cause the rest of the brain to get excited, emotionally reactive. That makes you emotionally reactive. You react to anything because you are now reacting to emotional excitements. And this is a condition called stressed. You are stressed. The other one is the conscious relaxation, conscious relaxed alertness. And when you are consciously relaxed and alert, this is what is commonly called in the zone. Right? That means you are able to pay attention to what's going on. You are very focused on things happening around you. You can see things clearly as they arise. Right? So this is in the zone. And the third state is that sleep and rest state where you're just falling into sleep. Now we have to be careful because this third state can happen when you're trying to meditate. The reason is, I'll just quickly talk about this third state in a moment. We'll come to that in a moment. See, this emotional activation arouses the amygdala. That means when your body is agitated, it further triggers arousal of the amygdala, and that leads to an emotionally reactive, tensed and stressed condition, right, in your whole body, mind and body. And on the other hand, conscious relaxation activates this parasympathetic nervous system, and this is the part of the nervous system that brings the whole mind to a peaceful state. This parasympathetic nervous system leads to a relaxed state of heightened conscious introspective alertness. You are aware, you are alert, you are introspective, you are paying attention to what's going on, and you are conscious. Right? Of course, the third state is sleep and rest. Now, these 3 states, the first one is tensed, agitated, excited, having an excited body and a restless mind. And if you think about it, this is precisely what those 5 hindrances are all about. Where you are now being excited by sensual pleasures, you are now being angered by pain, right? You could be experiencing this despair and depression which is commonly translated as sloth and torpor. But sloth and torpor is not a good translation. Tina, mida is not about laziness. Tina and mida is about a condition where your mind basically has lost motivation, in a state of despair and depression. Right? Perhaps later on we can ask Bhante to elaborate on Tina and mida. And then Udacha Kukucha is often translated as anxiety and worry, and that's also quite okay, right? Anxiety and worry. Or it's sometimes translated as restlessness. But actually it's a form of anxiety, so maybe later on, Bhante, we can ask Bhante Punnaji to explain to us later on about Tina, Mida and Udacha Kukucha. And then of course I spoke about Vichikicha. So basically, when you are in this stress state, you are experiencing the 5 hindrances at their extreme. So therefore, it's so important to learn to relax as a means, as the first step towards eliminating, eradicating, and stopping these 5 hindrances when you meditate. in the zone. Basically, you are consciously aware of what's going on. You have a relaxed body, a calm mind, and you are alert. You're awake, you're alert. And this alertness brings you into this in the zone. I'll talk a little bit of in the zone in a moment. The third one, right, is a rested body, where you may be experiencing digestion. So after food, your body wants to rest. That's why you get very lazy and tired and sleepy and drowsy after you have had food, because of the digestion going on. It may lead you to sleep. Now, when you meditate, you have to be careful, because some people meditate leaning their back on the chair. They don't realize. Leaning the back on the chair, the back coming into contact with a rested surface triggers the reticular activating system to say, it's time to sleep. So when you meditate with your back rested on the chair, the reticular activating system will begin to trigger a cycle in your mind to bring you to a sleepy state. This is why in every part of the sutra where the Buddha gave instructions on how to meditate, he said, find a place of seclusion, a quiet place under a tree, in a hut, in a quiet place in the forest or whatever. Sit down and straighten your back. The Buddha didn't say lean your back on the tree. He says straighten your back. When you straighten your back, the straightening of the back, not leaning on a rested surface, the straightening of the back triggers the reticular activating system to say, stay awake, be alert. That's what it is. So it's so important when you learn to meditate, you practice meditation to straighten your back. Don't lean your back on the chair. It's okay to put something to support the lumbar, that means the lower back, but not the upper back, because any contact of the upper back with a soft surface triggers the reticular activating system to say, go to sleep. Okay. So I hope one day that helps to explain a little bit more about meditation. Okay. This emotionally reactive state, this is an unconscious emotional arousal, and this triggers the mind to go into the past, because the mind is now restless. The mind wants to go somewhere. It doesn't know where to go, so it starts to run around, goes to the past and think about the past, trying to relive the past, and unpleasant experiences may arise and arouse your emotions even further. Or start to imagine about the future and then start to have uncertainties, because nobody is certain about the future. It can lead to anxieties. Or looking at the present and you're not happy with what's going on, dissatisfied with the present. Human beings is the only species of animal that regrets the past, fearful of the future, and dissatisfied with the present. So we're constantly dissatisfied with what's going on and demanding changes to the present moment. But present moment is already happening. And so this is a restless mind. The mind is running around full of anxiety and worry, and even going into a state of despair. And the reticular activating system activates the sympathetic nervous system to trigger this fight or flight reaction. This is stress, the stressful condition in the body. It is called sympathetic simply because it is sympathizing with what's going on. What's going on is that then the body is triggering to the reticular activating, the conditions of the body is sending signal to the reticular activating system that this organism is under threat. This organism is being stressed, and therefore the reticular activating system accentuates this stressful condition further. That's why it's sympathetic, sympathizes with this condition. So emotionally reactive and stressed condition has this high biochemical activity going on. Your hormones are being released. You're feeling discomfort. Your mind is being disturbed. And your mind begins to think in irrational way, erratic way. And you are unconsciously reactive. You begin to react to anything that comes to mind. Anything that you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, or anything that comes to mind. It may even lead to delusions, right? Delusional thinking, right? So this is this emotionally reactive state. and finally it could lead to depression. The other one, conscious relaxed alertness, basically your emotional arousal subsides, it dissipates because of conscious relaxation. After a short while, the biochemical reactions subside, and then your body begins to relax. Your mind begins to calm down, and you intentionally want to relax, intentionally compose your mind. So this intentionally releasing the tension from the body, allowing the body to relax, and remain in this consciously aware and alert state. And to continue in this state, you don't want to get distracted by your sense organs. You bring your attention inwards, introspective attention. This will avoid unnecessary attention, and bringing the attention inwards is basically using the breath as a mechanism to bring your attention inwards, so that you are now paying attention to your breathing process that's going on. You're not paying attention to your memory of past, imagination of future, expectations of changing the present. It minimizes excessive or unnecessary interpretation of your circumstances at that moment. It helps you focus your attention on the present moment without expectation. And the reticular activating system activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the activity of the nervous system that relaxes you, that calms you. And this brings your mind to a relaxed state. Relaxed state is not a rested state. Not talking about falling asleep. You're still alert and awake. So this is the conscious, relaxed, alert state. And basically you're free from tensions in the body, relaxed body, calm mind, conscious alertness, focused attention, and you are now able to choose your thoughts. In this condition, your mind is able to choose your thoughts. Your mind is no longer allowing the thoughts to choose you. Because in the stressed state, it is these erratic thoughts arising that is choosing you. And you get disturbed by irrational thoughts. But in this calm state, you are now able to choose your thoughts. You choose what you want to think. And Bhante calls this selective thinking. And that is what selective thinking is about. You choose thoughts of dispassion. You choose thoughts of compassion. You choose thoughts of happiness. You choose thoughts of tranquility. And that will lead you to wisdom. Right? So basically you choose your thoughts. So this is selective thinking process where you choose your thoughts. Dispassion, compassion, happiness, tranquility, wisdom. And this brings you in the zone. You are now cruising in the zone. Your mind is now sharp, alert, conscious, and able to choose what it wants to choose and not allow irrational, erratic thoughts to choose it. So, in the zone is basically about conscious, sustained, focused, introspective attention. That means conscious means you are now aware, intentional. You are not allowing unconscious activity to take control. You are consciously intentional what you want to do, and this is being sustained. It's not a momentary thing. You are able to continuously do this. And it is very focused on introspective thoughts, introspection, introspective attention. So that is what in the zone is about. I'm going to show you a video which basically highlights the top sports celebrities, how they can bring themselves in the zone. And one of the most famous people in the past, of course this was made at the time when he was at the peak of the game. They were using Tiger Woods as the example here when Tiger Woods was at the peak of the game, because this video was made some time ago. Of course, since then Tiger Woods had that. We'll talk about Tiger Woods, what happened later afterwards. But this is when Tiger Woods was at the peak of the game before he got divorced from his wife.
We know that Tiger Woods can do this because he has done it many times. But what is it about his brain that he's able to put the ball into the hole? What we found is the brain can either help you succeed in this athletic activity, or it can help you fail. And we think Tiger Woods has found a way to succeed most of the time because of his ability to modulate his own brain functioning.
Scientists can't scan Tiger Woods' brain in action. He would need to lie motionless, which would make playing golf impossible. So instead, they must make an educated guess.
Because he's blinking so little during a putt, we think that his anxiety is very low. Because eye blinking is usually related to anxiety. So he's very relaxed, like a drowsy state, a drowsy, sleepy level, but yet enough concentration that you can focus on the task.
Athletes call this special feeling being in the zone, when their movements seem to flow without conscious effort. It is the supreme combination of practice involving the cerebellum, concentration of the frontal lobes, and low anxiety of the amygdala within the limbic system.
Zone, it's very hard to get into. I really feel like if I can control my breath and I can get it as slow as possible, that'll slow down my heart. As soon as that happens, I feel like I get total consciousness of everything. All five senses are working the best they could possibly work.
Experts think the brain gets so focused, it's somehow able to block or ignore any irrelevant input. Brain and body begin working in perfect sync.
Athletes and everybody else, for that matter, all want to be in that zone, and there's something special about it. Everything gets aimed at the one task at hand, and when you do that, incredible things can happen. You have a real clarity of thought and decision making. When I'm in that moment, everything around me is slow and I can control what I'm thinking, I can control what I look at, I can control what thoughts enter my mind, and in turn that gives me the greatest chance for success.
So that is in the zone. Right? Basically, athletes learn how to relax and pay attention, and breathing is a very important part. They learn how to breathe. You know, if you don't slow down your breathing, you'll be breathing rapidly, and that rapid breathing itself is also triggering the reticular activating system that you are being stressed. That's why learning how to slow down your breathing is important. In fact, this is why I think for those of you who attend Bhante Punnaji's 10-day meditation retreat, you will remember very clearly. Every morning we do those yoga exercises. And when is the one moment of meditation during the day which is the most wonderful? That is straight after the yoga. That is when you are meditating in the zone. Because you have learned about tension and relaxation, and towards the later part of it, the last 20 minutes of it, you were experiencing full relaxation of the body. And Bhante was teaching you about this relaxation, like a lifeless log lying on the floor, lazily lying on the floor, and then that actually is helping you to be in the zone. So when you meditate after that, you're in the zone. So now, that brings us finally to how we can help ourselves. And that's why they say Buddhism is a humanistic religion. Buddhism is not a God-based religion. It's not God that's going to help us. You know, there is this common saying amongst theistic religions, God helps those who help themselves. Well, there's a truth in it. If you help yourself, that's it. And here in this case, we can say God could be in heaven. We can say God can be the heavenly beings that reside in heaven. So God help those who help themselves. Very true. Help yourselves. And I'm sure when you're doing wholesome things, the devas will come and help you too. So God help those who help themselves. Buddhism is a humanistic religion. It's very important to understand that and, in fact, look at the definition. If we look at the English dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, this is the definition of humanism or humanistic. Right? Rationalistic outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. That means human. It's all from the human mind, the human capacity. But actually the American Merriam-Webster dictionary is even more precise. I love this second definition. It says, a doctrine, attitude, or way of life centered on human interests or values, especially a philosophy that usually rejects supernaturalism and stresses on individuals' dignity and worth and capacity for self-realization through reason. Simply put, using the power of your intellect, your intelligence, which is reason, you are able to practice it yourself by self-realization, understanding it and practicing it by yourself. That's really what humanistic religion is all about. It's about the human being's capacity and diligence in cultivating goodness, not depending on God to tell you what is good and what is not good. Basically, it is the comparison. I love this because Bhante is the one who translated this. Comparison of heteronomous versus autonomous. Heteronomous is what is called Silabbata Paramasa, but unfortunately that was not very well translated. It is often translated as attachment to rites and rituals, but actually that is heteronomous morality. Whereas what Buddhism is autonomous morality, known as Kusala Mula. Heteronomous versus autonomous. What's the meaning? Hetero. Hetero means something from an external influence. Heteronomous means you do it because of an external influence. Something externally is influencing your behavior. Either in terms of specifying what you should or should not do, or forcing you to do something, right? Governing you, dictating you, right? Autonomous is what comes from within. Auto is from within. Autonomous means you want to do it. It comes from within you. You understand and you know what is right from wrong. So the main difference between a religion that emphasizes heteronomous morality versus Buddhism that emphasizes autonomous morality is simply that Buddhism teaches you knowledge and understanding of what is right, what is wrong. And with that knowledge and understand, you begin to want to do it. So the gaining the knowledge and the understanding is Sammā Diṭṭhi. Gaining the knowledge and understanding of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is not good. That is Sammā Diṭṭhi. You understand the right perspective, the harmonious perspective. And then wanting to do things, wanting to reorientate your life towards that is Sammā Sankappa. Right? So simply put, that's what it is. So when we talk about heteronomous morality, which is Silabbata Paramasa, this is commonly translated as attachment to rites and rituals, but it actually means obeying rules, regulations, and laws governed from external forces. So basically, by obeying what is stated as laws or commandments. You know, you have religions that say, we have 10 commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not this. Thou shalt not that. You know, these are commandments. They are laws. If you break them, something is going to happen to you. You know, so it is actually through a bit of fear, enforcing fear on people. So you fear this breaking of these commandments, fearing sinful and evil repercussions from breaking these laws. God will punish you. Punishment for wrongdoing. End up going to hell. You're fearful of going to hell. So some of these religions are pushing this line that if you do wrong, you do evil, you go to hell. And this is making people fearful of it. So in other words, they avoid doing wrong not because they understand it is wrong. They avoid doing wrong because they are fearful of going to hell. Or craving for reward from righteousness. And that is going to heaven. Oh, you do good, you praise the Lord, and all this, you will go to heaven. Right? So this is heteronomous morality, governed by external influences. What comes from within is autonomous morality, Kusala Mula. Kusala Mula is commonly translated also as wholesome, skillful means. Kusala is wholesome and skillful. Right? Mula is the origin. So in other words, it originates from within us. We want to be skillful. We want to practice what is wholesome from within. So that is autonomous morality. The arising from within, the aspiration of wanting to do good because we know doing good is a good thing. Not because we are fearful of punishment, right? Or lust for reward of going to heaven and so on. And this is governed by what is stated as precepts. Now, precepts are not laws. Precepts are training rules, guidelines to train people. So it's actually guidance of training. Actually, maybe it's not even rules, it's guidance, training guidance, right? Guiding us. What would be good, what would not be so wholesome, and so on. So precepts, abiding by precepts. And it is centered around knowledge and understanding of the good and wholesome. Gaining this knowledge and understanding is Sammā Diṭṭhi, right? What is commonly called right view, but it is actually, basically it is harmonious perspective. And understanding that all actions are subject to the laws of karma, right? So we want to do good because we know it will lead to good outcome. We do bad, it will lead to bad outcome. Knowing good leads to good outcome. Knowing bad leads to bad outcome. So we are motivated internally to want to do good and avoid doing bad. And basically understanding and practicing that good intentions lead to wellness, peace, and happiness. And this good intention is Sammā Sankappa, harmonious orientation. Orientating your whole life towards good intention. Right? Sammā Sankappa. So you have it here, basically. Sammā Ditthi Sammā Sankappa. And this leads us to the word aspiration. Aspiration is different from the other word, which is commonly used, inspiration. What's the difference between inspiration and aspirations? Inspiration is talking about being inspired by what you see. You see someone doing good, oh, you're inspired. You see some people performing or experiencing benefits from their actions, you are inspired. So that is inspiration. Nothing wrong with that. But aspiration is to take it one level deeper. When you see people doing good, you understand why. You understand the goodness of the wholesome act. Understanding that and wanting to do good yourself, that wanting is aspiration. So in other words, you're not doing something because you want to follow in somebody's example. You're doing something because you really want to do it yourself. So it's very interesting. Sammā Diṭṭhi is the part where we are cultivating based on inspiration. We are inspired by the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So that inspiration is very important. So Sammā Diṭṭhi is inspiration. We are inspired by the goodness of the Buddha and by the teachings of the Dharma and by the examples of the Sangha. Now, having been inspired, we now want to do it ourselves. That aspiration is Sammā Sankappa. The wanting to change your life, reorientate your whole life in that direction because that is what you really want to do. Kusala mula. Not because somebody told you so. Not because you're fearful of going to hell and so on. Okay. So aspiration is very important, and that leads us to one very next slide, next part, which then actually takes us into the Sila part of the Eightfold Path, but I'll just jump the gun and touch a little bit on the Sila part. Okay, so we covered basically the Panya part. This is the initial Panya.
You know, you spoke about this heteronomous and autonomous.
Yes.
The important thing here is that in this harmonious perspective, you know, the first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, the first thing that the Buddha focuses on is these two extremes.
Yes, the two extremes.
Yeah. The two extremes, really the two extremes come in the form of indulgence and now the two parts getting in here. One is our desire for pleasure.
Yeah.
That is one part of our mind wants to enjoy pleasures.
Yeah.
And the other part of the mind wants to be good.
Okay.
So it's the part of the mind that wants to be good,
Yes.
that wants to stop going after pleasure.
Yeah, the self-torment.
Yeah. So these are two conflicting
Vichikicha.
yeah. Vichikicha.
This is Vichikicha in the true sense.
Yeah.
In the extreme.
Yeah. And now the Buddha shows the middle path. And that medial way, what is the medial way? It's the complete relaxation of the body and calming the mind.
Yeah.
That is the medial way.
Conscious.
That solves the problem.
Yeah.
That solves the problem. And that means instead of going after pleasures, instead of trying to be good, we begin to calm the mind and relax the body.
Yeah. Mental equilibrium.
Yeah.
Conscious relaxation.
Yeah. Now that is why after the Sammā Diṭṭhi, we get into Sammā Sankappa. And the Sammā Sankappa is the reorientation where our focus becomes perfect tranquility of mind.
Yeah.
Now, in that heteronomous and autonomous thing, the words that the Buddha uses is Silabbata Paramasa becomes the one thing. And here you have put the Kusala Mula.
That came from you, Bhante.
Yeah, but the real thing is Aparamattam Samadhi Sangmaktanikam.
I need to get it from you.
Yeah. Aparamattam means the opposite of Paramasa. Paramasa is the heteronomous.
Yeah.
Aparamatta means the opposite of heteronomous. That is the meaning of the word aparamatta. It's not depending on others' wishes. We are not even depending on the Buddha's wishes.
Yes.
We depend on our understanding.
Yes.
That is why it is autonomous.
Yes.
So,
knowledge and understanding.
Aparamattam, Samadhi Sangvattanika means orientation towards Samadhi, which is tranquility of mind. So, in other words, the autonomous morality is going towards tranquility. Instead of thinking of pleasure, instead of thinking of goodness, we are thinking of tranquility.
So good intention lead to wellness, peace, and
Wellness,
happiness. That
peace
is
and
the
happiness.
tranquility,
That's right. Yeah.
which ultimately is upeka.
That is the important thing.
Yeah. Where can I get this aparamatang samasa whatever?
Aparamatta
Which
Samadhi
sutra is it mentioned in Pali?
No, that is...
That is in one of the sutras?
oh yes, yes. It's not not only in the sutras, it is when talking about the heteronomous thing. Silabbata Paramasa.
Which sutra can I find this, Bhante? Which sutra can I find this?
I will
you let me
get
know.
it for you.
Yeah, because I want to know the exact sutra so I can use the exact wordings. I read the sutra, then I'll be able to use that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we covered basically the panya part. This is the initial panya. Then let's take a look at the sila part. When we cultivate metta, if we begin to practice and cultivate a sense of selflessness, aspiring others to be healed from their suffering, that can actually do something to our brain also. Let's listen to the scientists. The guy sitting next to, this fellow sitting next to Dalai Lama is actually Richard Davidson, one of the foremost neuroscientists researching on the brain, especially during meditation. And he's the one who's explaining what happens when we have an aspiration for metta, aspiration for other people to be healed of their suffering.
If we show people this picture and we ask people to have the aspiration that this baby will be healed and will be free from suffering. What does that do to the brain to have that kind of aspiration? And it turns out when people adopt that kind of attitude, it changes their brain. And so there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, and that's shown in blue. And that part of the brain is modulated when people wish this baby to be free from suffering, transform the emotion to make it more positive and express compassion. And so there's now good evidence to suggest that the brain changes in response to this kind of training. People differ in how skilled they are at voluntarily regulating their emotions. And when people are better able to regulate their negative emotions, they show less activation in this part of the brain, the amygdala, and it's also associated with more activation in a part of the brain in the prefrontal cortex up here.
Now, this is very interesting. This is the finding of the scientists. He's basically saying that if we have this selfless aspiration, what happens to our brain? So the aspiration to reduce suffering in others actually reduces the activation of the amygdala. That means it makes us less reactive to emotional excitement. It makes us less reactive to anything that may arouse our emotions. Because amygdala is basically the part of the brain that is easily aroused and creates an emotional chain reaction. So when we have aspirations of wanting to heal other people from suffering, that wish, that aspiration coming from within actually helps us reduce our emotional reactivity. And he went on to explain further, and this is very interesting. He pointed out that people differ in their skill level at voluntary downregulation of emotional affect, as reflected in reduced activation of the amygdala, which is accompanied by increased activation of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Now that is a mouthful. So I'm going to break this down and explain bit by bit. The first thing he says, people differ in their skill at voluntary downregulation of negative affect. Negative affect here is referring to the affective process, the emotional activity in your mind, right? So, in other words, every person has a different level of capability and capacity, skill, to voluntarily downregulate. That means to voluntarily reduce emotions. So, different people have different skill level of handling their emotions. That's what he's saying. And this can be reflected, that means scientifically it can be measured and reflected in reduced activation of the amygdala. That means when you're able to manage and when you're more skillful at reducing your emotional excitement, it will show up as a reduced activation of your amygdala. And at the same time, which is accompanied by increased activation of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. In other words, when you're able to manage your emotions and regulate your emotions so that you don't get aroused and easily excited and react to your emotional arousals, you are actually training this part of your brain, sharpening that part of the brain which is responsible for goal setting, for planning, and in fact responsible for your Sammā Diṭṭhi and Sammā Sankappa. So that's really what it is. So in a nutshell, we basically have this Sublime Eightfold Way. We have talked about the initial part of Panya, which is Sammā Diṭṭhi and Sammā Sankappa. And then, of course, the next part is about Sila, the practice of harmonious speech, harmonious action, and harmonious lifestyle. Now, one important thing is lifestyle, not livelihood. Livelihood is referring to the job that you do, the work that you do, your occupation. But I think the Buddha is not just referring to your occupation alone. What about the rest of your life? So here, this is Sammā Ajiva, is about harmonious lifestyle, your entire lifestyle, not just what you do for a living, not just your occupation, but also how you behave yourself at home. Right? And of course, finally, the part which deals with meditation, called Samadhi. This is harmonious exercise, harmonious attention, and harmonious equilibrium, mental equilibrium. So today we have basically covered the first one, harmonious perspective, harmonious orientation. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much. Any questions to my presentation before we hand over to Bhante to explain to us those Uducha, Kukucha, and Tina Mida? Any questions on what I have presented so far? Bhante, anything you would like to clarify that I may have spoken wrongly? Then we have that question for you, Bhante, about the 5 hindrances.
Now, in that 5 hindrances,
the translations,
that this is very important thing that you have brought here. You know these 3 things, 1, 2, 3, emotionally reactive, conscious relaxed, alertness, and sleep and resting. How the emotionally reactive is going on the sympathetic pathway.
Yes, sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
That's right.
So there are the 2 pathways, sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
That's right.
So the parasympathetic is the conscious relaxed alertness.
That's right. That's what I mentioned earlier on. Yes.
Now, the sleep resting there is the Tina Midda.
The Tina Mida.
Tina Midda is that sleep and rest which also takes you into the hypnotic state.
Okay, so
hypnosis goes into that. So by the Kama, Chanda and Vyapada are the basic desire for pleasure and the hatred of pain.
Yeah.
So the 2 basic things are the Kama, Chanda and the Vyapada. And the next one is when you try to stop that, when you try to stop it, you go into the opposite, which is Tina Midda.
Yeah.
And you might just go to sleep or into the hypnotic state.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is you become agitated, anxiety, worry. The Uddacha Kukkucha means you go to the opposite. Either you go to sleep or you become emotionally excited. That is the Uddacha Kukkucha. And then, of course, there is this Vichikiccha. Those are the natural things that you get into when you are trying to get rid of Kamachanda and Vyapada. Those are the basic things that you are trying to get rid of. So the real basic hindrances are Kamachanda and Vyapada. But when you try to stop that, either you get into the Tinamidda and go to sleep, or the other is you become agitated. With yeah,
it's a frustration.
Yeah. And then the cognitive dissonance occurs because your mind is divided into two.
Yeah.
Okay. So to overcome all that is the calming of the mind
in the zone.
Yeah. And then you get into the in the zone state.
Yeah.
That is the first jhana. When you get into the first jhana, then you have vitakka, vichara, piti, sukha, ekaggata.
Yeah, in the zone.
That is in the zone.
So in other words, when we are practicing our meditation and we begin to recognize being in the zone, we're actually into jhana already. Huh?
Yeah.
Except that the moment you recognize, I'm in jhana, you're out of it. That excitement takes you out of it right away. The stillness has been disturbed. Okay, wonderful, Bhante.
Yeah.